Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We now have Bethany Blankley online. She's a political analyst for Fox News Radio. She's appeared on television and radio programs nationwide, writes about political, cultural, and religious issues in America from the perspective of an evangelical and former communication strategist for 4 senators, 1 congressman, a former New York governor, and several nonprofits. She earned her master's degree in theology from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, and her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Maryland. Bethany, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. And thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your service on the media lines here. One of the things we were talking about during the break is that, one of your calling cards is that you're nonpartisan but equally offensive to all.
Yes, I am.
I have not found your columns to be very offensive. Actually, I've seen a number of them, and they've been spot on. One of the columns that I read the other day came out on Saturday. And I guess maybe before we get into what you've written, I'd like to get kind of just so our audience can get to know you a little bit, kind of what makes you tick. I mean, what you see is kind of the big overview, the issues facing the country, and why you write the way you write. Can you give us kind of a feel for your background and your views on contemporary society and where this country is headed?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Thank you. All right. So my first job was with Bob Dole when I was 19 years old. He was the Senate Majority Leader. I guess I just gave everybody my age, but oh well. And I worked on Capitol Hill with him when he was Senate Majority Leader. I worked on his presidential campaign, and I went on to work from there in the press offices of other senators, Senator Presto from South Dakota, Senator Susan Collins from Maine. And when I worked for her, 1 year of my life was spent to the investigations and deliberations over the impeachment proceedings of Bill Clinton. And she was one of 5 Republican senators to vote no, not to impeach. And while I was working on the Hill, you learn a lot of things just about the culture. And then after that, I worked for a congressman from South Jersey. So my whole background was media, writing speeches. I wrote most of their remarks. I wrote their weekly columns. Sorry to tell people that they don't actually write much of what gets published. I wrote a lot of the press releases. I spoke to the media. I've been on TV, all those kinds of things. And as a Christian, I was really enriched by a relationship I had with Dr. Lloyd Ogilvie, who was the Senate chaplain at the time. And although I did not play softball, I went to softball games on the mall. And in Congress, when you are working for a congressman, everything is bipartisan because it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Everyone is on different halls depending on when they're elected to Congress and seniority, and they get to pick which office. So you get to know people who you work with on your hall and or in your building even, or from committee assignments that you might be working with. And so you get to meet people from different backgrounds who work for Democrats or Republicans, and there's a big softball league on the Hill. So you are playing with several offices on your hall. So it could be that you have Republicans and Democrats on your team. And I went to Bible studies with Democrats and Republicans. And after impeachment and after Bush in 2000, all of that stopped. And there is a huge animosity between people because I would say the difference between Washington then and Washington now is that people did have ideological differences. They did believe, my friends who are Democrats were pro-life. They worked for pro-life Democrats who no longer exist. But they really did believe in their approach to government. They believed in their ideology. They believed in their cause just as much as I did with mine, or we believed that we were all working together for the good. We saw each other as public servants. What is going on now in Washington, D.C. and in the White House there is no comparison. There is no comparison to 2015 America, what is going on right now in D.C. to when I was there in 1998, which, by the way, was the last time there has ever been a budget. Normally, the president and the Senate leader, they introduce budgets, they go through committee processes, there's a lot of deals and appropriations, goes to the president, he signs the budget into law. We have not had a budget since 1998. What we've been doing is passing omnibus bills and extensions for existing programs. They make up these ridiculous, false conflicts over entitlements versus foreign aid and all these other things. What people need to understand is that 75% of our foreign aid goes to Islamic countries who are determined to destroy us. And what Congress has done since 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, starting last December, starting last December, but going back to 2010, is that we are funding with our tax dollars the CIA and our military. We are funding, training, and supplying Islamic terror throughout the Middle East, what's happening in Europe, and the result of all of that is culminated into what people are seeing ISIS doing. And so when I hear congressmen say we need to fight ISIS, or when I hear potential presidential nominees say we need to fight ISIS, I say to them, do you not understand that we created ISIS? They are using our guns. They are using our ammunition. The Toyota Jeeps they're driving are from America. We train them on our military bases in Jordan and Qatar. And so I recently joined a coalition with some retired military and some other people who worked in government and researchers, and we have written something called the Betrayal Papers on my website.
And we put that up today.
Okay.
The fourth edition came out. I knew that you were one of the consortium that helped develop that. They're very well written, very well researched, very well documented, very convincing, and also, I might add, very popular. I mean, there's a real following for those.
So I've only posted the first two on my website because I edit them from my own. I add things and edit them. Like, I want to put in more understanding of Islam, whereas theirs is a little bit more political. I want to explain to people that Islam is a political ideology, even though people will say it is a religion. But what I have been trying to say, I've been in Iowa, I've been in California, Arizona, Florida, all these places. What I am trying to tell people, what I am trying to tell America is that 85% of our Congress is guilty of treason for voting to send nearly what will be by this June $12 billion in cash to Iran that is determined to destroy us. So why are we funding tax money to Iran, who, by the way, is a very good ally with Cuba, and at the very, very specific time, the man in the White House says that he is going to open negotiations and open the pathway to Cuba. There is zero coincidence here, folks. Opening
so
Cuba.
So tell me, I mean, how many of the 75% know what they're doing? Is this just a matter of a huge bill they just don't know?
They absolutely do know, because in 2012 and in 2014, I have this in several of my columns. What happens is that when you go to America's Betrayal, I put on my website, I put very specific links, and I have something in there, I believe, that has congressional funding. And what happened was Obama said that he needed extra discretionary spending. Do you remember when he called these people Junior League? Do you remember when he said, Assad, it's time for you to step aside so that we can have Democratic moderates and we can have democracy in Syria? That was all a big fat lie. So when he had Congress authorized to spend $1.5 billion, so far we've spent $6 trillion in this entire mess over there. And the entire point was that they are funding what the Islamic rebels were doing to overthrow Assad, because they said there were chemical weapons, which, by the way, came from Iraq. And John Kerry would not admit that they were the ones that George Bush was talking about when everybody was protesting Iraq. And no one is protesting our involvement with Syria. And all of these things. Remember the red line in the red line that nobody would cross in the sand that Obama mentioned, which, by the way, the media never followed up on. There were all of these comments that Obama made about these different conflicts, and we sent money every year to, quote unquote, fund these moderate, freedom-loving Democratic, these moderate rebels to try and effect political change in Syria. So this was August of 2011. He told Assad to step aside so we could have democratic or moderate rebels. By this time, the CIA had already put together the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian National Council, which, by the way, were not Syrian. They were mercenaries from Turkey. The money was coming from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UK, and the US. And the only reason we know this is because I will tell you the only benefit of bureaucracy is it always leaves a paper trail. And the paper trail that a Pulitzer Prize journalist found, a reporter, Cy Hirsch, uncovered the reality of what was behind Benghazi. And this was published in the Washington Post, and it got buried. And they found a subcommittee report. And this is why all of Congress has been silent. This is why they will not bring the president to impeachment, because that majority of 85%, there were only 15%, I tallied them, 15% in Congress said, we will not fund this.
Wow. Well, we've got about 15 seconds here before the bottom of the hour. I want to talk a little bit more about that, as well as your recent paper that came out, or article on Saturday. But obviously opinionated. I think you're right-minded. I've certainly been concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood's influence on the administration, the other things this country is doing that's counter to the people's interest. We'll talk more about that with Bethany Blankley after these messages. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We have with us Bethany Blankley. She has quite a history. She's a prolific writer, blogger, very engaged with what's going on currently in American politics, Fox News radio political analyst, been on television and radio programs nationwide. She also has worked as a communication strategist for 4 senators, 1 congressman, a former New York governor, and several nonprofits. And I'm sure you don't wear this as a badge of pride on your sleeve, but you mentioned that you'd worked with Senator Bob Dole. How did you connect with him? Are you from the Midwest, or where are you originally from?
I'm from the Northeast, and I am a proud Terp fan. I'm a proud Terp supporter. And so at the University of Maryland, I believe I was involved in some kind of local organization in Maryland, and Don Devine was running for Congress, and he lost. But he and Bob Dole were old war buddies. And I happened to be at this event, introduced myself, and said that I really admired him and I'd love to work for him. And I got a call the next day.
Interesting. Yeah, there are a lot of solid conservatives that actually worked for him. Floyd Brand, a friend of mine, you probably know him from Western journalism, helped out with the presidential campaign. Of course, looks back on it. He certainly has a better perspective on what ought to be going on in D.C. now than he did have then. But in any event,
that campaign was a disaster.
Absolutely.
But, yeah. Anyway, but to just follow up on what we had finished on earlier, Congress definitely does know. They have no excuse. And I am not a Republican and I am not a Democrat. I am an American. I have lived overseas twice in 3 different countries as an adult. Every time I come back, I kiss the ground. We are more blessed than anyone could ever understand. I loved living in Switzerland. I loved living in London. I loved living in Scotland. I could live in Scotland all the time. But at the end of the day, I am an American. My heritage came from Scotland and Switzerland and Sweden and all these other Western countries, but I am an American. I love my country. I believe that God has called me to this very specific time and place to speak to what I see is happening in our country, both politically and spiritually, because every issue is a spiritual issue. When our government puts us in debt, it is putting future generations in bondage. When our government doesn't protect our future children, they are putting them in harm's way. There is zero excuse for anyone in Congress to still be there who continues to fund Islam. Our State Department is funding and advocating for Islam in Western countries. And as people I have talked to in our coalition of retired military and CIA experts who will not be named for fear of being killed, is that our State Department is also facilitating an entire network of sex trafficking. And I am disgusted by what my government is doing. I am very much anti-Islam, but I am very much pro-Muslim because I believe that children are the most innocent and helpless of any person in the world. I I had absolutely nothing to do with where I was born or to whom I was born. I had nothing to do with the opportunities that I was given. And these little children that are being forced into the most horrendous circumstances beyond what you see people doing to those PETA commercials, beyond what you see them doing to dogs in cages, this is happening to little children under the age of 8. And I do not approve. And I don't approve. I will not let this happen on my watch.
Right. So you're saying that the State Department has some interface with that.
Absolutely.
Let me interject just one thing real quick. Back, it was about 3 years ago, I think, and I may be a little bit off on the time. I think it was the Dutch Minister of Justice. He had been suspected for years and years, over a decade, of being a child molester. And nobody would talk about it, but it was an unstated curiosity that finally blew out in the open because apparently he trafficked 2 young boys from Turkey into his nation, of course, somehow alleged that he had some sort of interaction with them. The Turkish government basically forced this thing out to the open, where finally there were articles written on what had been suspected for years and now was based up. There was actually some substance behind it. Hillary Clinton wrote a letter on State Department letterhead basically defending this guy. And it just was out of the blue. It's like, what in the world is this from? Why are you doing this? Why are you staking reputation behind this guy? It just was shocking to me. Do you have explanation for that?
Hillary has given money to Hamas from the State Department. Hillary has given money and taken money from all of the Islamic nations she's been to, which is why she should be, and I believe is being investigated. Because every country she was in, as the Secretary of State, there was money linked to donations given to their foundation. That's a whole other issue. But what I want to point out is that in July of 2014, Obama asked Congress to authorize $500 million to increase existing support for moderate and quote-unquote appropriately vetted rebels, okay? This was in the context of the $1.5 billion Regional Stability Initiative, which, by the way, Congress voted for because he had said, oh, those rebels are junior league. But guess what? We paid for them. Never in the history of the United States of America have we ever, in the history of the United States of America, never have we left weapons, ammunition, transportation, tanks, planes, jeeps in a foreign country when we leave from a war. ISIS is using our weapons. They are using our technology. They are using our ammunition. When you see those
It blew me away the other day. I was watching a news report. This is actually several weeks ago. And it shows them driving M1 tanks, presumably M1A1 tanks, down the streets. And it's like, American tanks? They're in possession of American tanks?
Exactly. We left all of this for them in perfect working order. We have never done that in the history of the United States. We are aiding and abetting people determined to destroy America.
Here's what I can't, Bethany, I can't figure that. This is what I can't figure out. I served for a time in the military, still have classmates from West Point that are serving, stay in contact with them. Nobody that I know, and these are mostly 06s now. I think we've got a couple of classmates that are generals, but nobody supports this move of the Obama administration to support the Islamists. And yet, obviously, this whole effort cannot be done alone. It can't just be Obama and his cadre, the Muslim Brotherhood.
No. Obama is not the mastermind, and I need to clarify. Obama is like a puppet. If anybody's read the Narnia series, in the last battle, the last book of this series, there's a donkey named Puzzle, and there's an ape named Shift, and he comes up with the idea that he keeps telling Puzzle how dumb he is, and he needs to put on this lion skin so that he can lie to all of the animals in Narnia that Aslan has returned. And he gets them, because this is the point. If people do not know what truth is, they will not be able to identify what is false. And so he gets all of these lemmings to believe that this donkey in the lion skin is the real Aslan, and obviously he's not. But he's working with 2 invading forces, one coming in on the ocean, the other coming in, who's chopping down trees on the other end. He is working with allies who all have different motivations. So what's going on right now, there is an Islamification around the world, but there is also the driving force of George Soros that is funding and seeking to overthrow democratic governments, to destroy currencies to have his goal is to have a worldwide currency. His goal is to take from the wealthy nations to give to the poor nations, to equalize everything out, which, by the way, he could do with his own money. He doesn't need to do it through us. He has billions. He could do it himself. It's the same thing that Bill and Melinda Gates are doing with their foundation, with their population control initiatives under the guise of women's health. They are now just announced last year a $4 billion initiative to inject 200 million women with Depo-Provera shots to, quote-unquote, help them with women's health. If anybody knows the history of Depo-Provera, it started with Upjohn in the 70s, where they were testing women in Cambodia. They got a chicken for every shot. I've written about this because the birth control, this is a totally different subject, but the birth control medications on the market today should be illegal. They never, ever should have been legalized. They are killing women. People know this, and they're doing it because they want to advocate population control. There are different forces at work. One of them is Islam. Another is communism. They're buddies, like Russia and Hitler. Hitler and Stalin were buddies until it didn't work anymore, and then they became enemies. And so it's the same thing. So Obama is working with different partners. They are allies for now. But as you see in Europe, once Christianity leaves, once the pulpits close, once the churches go, once people stop procreating, they aren't marrying, there's a void. And that void is always replaced and filled by something else. And that was secularism. Once secularism started to die out because there is no fruit from it, what happened? All the immigrants come in. They're from Muslim countries because that's part of the first stage of jihad. There are 3 stages of jihad in Islam. The first is immigration, infiltration, procreation, and then propagation. And what you will see throughout Europe, what we have seen with the violence starting in pockets of certain cities, is the in-between move between stage 2 and 3. And we are in the beginning stages in our own country. Anybody needs to go to learn about this, just go to Dearborn, Michigan.
All right, Bethany, hold that thought. We'll be back with the Joe Miller Show after these messages. Stay with us. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, the Joe Miller Show. Bethany Blankley with us. She's a political analyst for Fox News Radio, columnist. Put out a recent article in Washington Times that we're going to talk about. Bethany, during the break, you were talking to me about your perspective that because of this, basically infiltration in the United States, mass immigration from Islamic countries, that we're likely to see a major catastrophe before the end of the year, I think is how you put it, that would rival 9/11. Tell our audience.
No, it would be worse than that. I think 9/11 will be peanuts. And I'm very serious when I say this, which is why I want everyone who can listen to this on the radio and online to contact their state legislators, their congressmen, their senators, and their governor, to contact their news organizations. If you can, hold protests. Tell people that we are sending nearly $12 billion in cash to Iran, which is a foreign enemy of the United States. Our Congress is committing treason. The man in the White House is committing treason. And there are cash payments that are being sent to Iran to, quote-unquote, help them complete their nuclear disarmament conversation, which, by the way, is not about that. So this is what's happened. I'm just going to briefly mention this, is that between November of 2014 and July 2015, there was a deal that reduces the sanctions that we've had on Iran, and it allows them to have about $4.9 billion that have been previously frozen. So what I'm explaining is that Iran is going to receive 10 payments of $490 million in cash. And the first 2 payments were made in December of last year. Remember, I was talking about how Congress voted 85% to extend that funding? That was included. The first 2 payments to Iran were made in December. The next release, the last release is February 11th. There are 2 more scheduled for March. Call your congressman. Call your senator. Call your governor. Call everybody you know. Sign it. Start a petition. Start a recall if your congressman or senators voted for this.
It's amazing. Admiral Lyons was on this program last week, and he went through the history of Iran's aggression toward the United States and the literally hundreds of deaths that are attributed to Iranian action. I mean,
there have
not
been
just,
more deaths committed by Iran on Americans than any other country.
Well, certainly in the Gulf War, the roadside bombs, certainly what happened in Lebanon, and there's been significant and aggressive action by Iran toward the United States and toward Israel. Sure.
Yeah, in Israel. I mean, I was in Israel a month ago, and there were 2 Israeli soldiers that were killed right around the Golan Heights area because Hezbollah in Lebanon sent rocket-propelled grenades and killed these guys on Israeli soil. That was a direct order from Iran. Anyway, there are 2 scheduled for March. We're in the middle of March. Call your congressmen and senators. This nonsense about having legislation to put restrictions. This is what Congress is completely inept. We're talking about trying to figure out and restrain how Iran can spend the money rather than saying, no, we are not going to send any money to Iran, period. I was talking to someone earlier who said, tell your congressman to tell them to sign this letter to Congress or to petition Congress to improve sanctions and not do this deal and blah, blah, blah. No. Say to them, you are committing treason if you can send any more money to Iran. There are 2 payments scheduled for March. Get this. More cash assets will be given to Iran on April 15th. Does that date sound familiar to anyone? April 15th, May 6th, May 27th, and June 27th to June 22nd. By June of this year, they will have sent $11.9 billion to Iran. So there is no coincidence that
and they're laughing all the way to the bank. We just saw a video, 2 weeks ago, of Iran doing naval maneuvers, attacking a mock-up of a United States aircraft carrier.
Yeah,
and yet we're giving them money? Crazy.
How far do people understand that Cuba is from the American coast? So what I want to tell people is that we have a responsibility right now, because anyone who is 40 and younger, if they want to grow up to be their parents' age or their grandparents' age, they won't. Right now we have a responsibility. My generation has a responsibility. In the article that you mentioned, there are several things that have really upset me in my research. One of them is that our government is taking children away from their parents without process. To learn about what you can do in your state to make sure that the laws protect parents from being to-be parents is something called parentalrights.org. Another thing I want you to be able to look up on YouTube, but it's also on my website under America's Betrayal, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's called The Jewish Voices on Campus. It's posted by Aaron Goldenberg, and it will show you in less than 5 minutes how Jews are being targeted, attacked, brutal things are being done to them, hate crimes, they're dying, and you will see eyewitness testimony, you will see video, and you will hear people give accounts of what happened to them because of Muslims on American soil and on American campuses who are targeting Jews specifically because they hate Jews. Why?
And part of the issue, too, is, we've had such a huge number of foreign students, Islamists. Obviously, Saudi Arabia's been funding a lot of it. And so they end up, the anti-Semitism grows from that population that has been increasing over the years. I read a stat, and I think somebody talked about it on our show a couple of weeks ago, about the number of Middle Eastern Arabs, Muslims here on student visas. And it's skyrocketed since 9/11. Skyrocketed.
Absolutely. Well, it skyrocketed in 2008.
Well, it increased under the Bush administration, though, too. It ended up going down for 3 or 4 years and then started going up under the Bush administration and, of course, continued its upward trajectory under the Obama administration. But it's like these people are, like we used the term before, tone deaf. Here you had kids on student visas that are supposedly responsible for 9/11, and yet we're increasing the problem. We aren't addressing it.
Exactly. And executive amnesty, okay? This is a guide to up the idea of bringing in Muslims to them amnesty to allow them to create societies within societies with the sole purpose of destroying America from within. I outlined in the Washington Times. Sadly, the Washington Times doesn't provide the hyperlinks to my sources, which I send them because whoever the naysayers may be, the Washington Times doesn't publish propaganda. They check my sources, know that I've done research. All of my arguments are valid. And so there are other news outlets that do say the hyperlinks to the sources. But what I outline in the Washington Times is that there is tyranny like we have never before seen in America, like I never saw before during impeachment trials when I worked in Congress. And what is happening now in our country is an abomination. I inherited this land. It is my inheritance from the blood, sweat, and tears of my grandfathers and brothers who fought in World War II. It is my land. It has been invaded. And it is my responsibility and my generation and younger than me to reclaim what has been lost for us. And what I have to tell people is that what is going to happen in this country will be worse than a civil war. People at odds with each other in the same neighborhood. There will be people who say there's no problem. There will be people like me who see what's going to happen. There will be people who are just completely apathetic. Listen, there are jihad camps in 26 of our states. They are training. They're getting taxpayer money. They're on welfare, getting tax credits. They are training to kill us. And at the same time, we have the state governments taking parents, targeting homeschool, targeting pastors, targeting Christians. Yet the imams and the
Bethany,
mosques are not touched.
It's a world upside down. We're getting to the top of the hour. I appreciate you spending your time with us on the show. We'll put up at least one of your articles. All right. Well, we appreciate having you. We'll put up at least one of your articles at Restoring Liberty. This show is made possible by the McPherson Group Tax Defense Attorneys, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, BEAT-IRS, rescuing Americans from IRS tyranny. Have more great guests coming up this week. Daily show, 2 to 4 p.m., The Joe Miller Show. Thanks for staying with us.